morning again. Will you pray with me? Loving and gracious God, may the words of my mouth and the meditations of all our hearts be acceptable in your sight, our strength and our Redeemer. Amen. When I went off to college, I thought I was going to be an elementary school teacher. And then in my introduction to education class, I was sent into an actual elementary classroom to help a teacher. That's how I learned that I was definitely not called to be an elementary school teacher. Then I transferred to a different school, and I majored in business because my dad thought I should. He thought that would help me make a lot of money at some point in my life. I wanted to please my dad, and the school that I went to, Georgia State, was known for its great business school, and I figured if I wasn't going to teach little kids, maybe I should major in something that would earn me a lot of money. I still remember the phone call where I told my dad that there was no way I could continue as a business major. I was definitely not called to that. He seemed a bit disappointed, but I think he began to understand that I couldn't major in something that didn't feel like my call. I was the first person to graduate college in my family, and so I think he was just really focused on the whole idea of finishing and graduating college, no matter what I did with it. He later did come to understand why it was so important to me to do something that I felt called to, something that I felt was my vocation. But I still didn't quite know what that was. And then I was talking to my mom, and I was talking about how much I wanted to teach, and I knew I wanted to teach high school now, not little kids, because, no. And she said, you know, you've always been really good at French, and they're going to need that soon in high schools in Georgia, because they were about to be requiring foreign languages. She said, what about French? And I thought, there you have it. And that's how I fell into my first vocation. My mom, go figure. So I decided I would major in French and minor in education, and I felt called to do that. And I had the privilege of being able to live into that call. And it was amazing and rewarding. It brought me closer to God, it brought me closer to my authentic self. I taught high school French and Spanish from 1988 until 2008, when I went to seminary. And during that time was the time when I came back to Christianity, and I began to see how I really had been called into this wonderful vocation of teaching. And I came to understand my job as a true vocation. I also realized that part of that vocation was helping to start the Gay-Straight Alliance and to do all of the things that then led me to end up in seminary. I wonder if Peter and Andrew and James and John realized that Jesus was inviting them into a new vocation when he asked them to put down their nets and follow him. I wonder if that really dawned on them, or if they just went because they knew that this guy had something. But that's what Jesus was doing. He was calling them into a new vocation to help heal the world, here and now. Galilee in Jesus' time was a region of oppression for the Jews. Under Roman occupation, the elite of the Roman Empire were supported on the backs of the rural Jewish peasants who made up most of Jesus' audience. They were taxed beyond their means, they were poor and hungry and barely able to survive. And as fishermen, Peter, Andrew, James, and John were trying to eke out a living, supplying the fish quotas for the Roman Empire. Their impulsive decision to leave what little livelihood they had and follow Jesus would mean even harder times for them and for their families. Is it any wonder that Jesus' call was compelling? Of course these fishermen yearned for some other way to be than in the oppression of the empire. Of course they longed for a different world, an empire that didn't break their backs and their spirits. How excited they must have been to hear that a new world was on its way. I wonder if these disciples understood that the kingdom of heaven that Jesus was talking about depended on them and their help to arrive. I bet they didn't in the moment. I bet they didn't understand fully the implication of Jesus' offer to make them fishers of people. I doubt that any of us understand what Jesus is calling us to right when it happens. I know that I didn't. I didn't know that when I became a teacher, I would eventually come out as not straight and be asked to lead a Gay-Straight Alliance, and finally feel called to do something about the teenagers who were told by their faith communities that they were not worthy of love. I could never have imagined being called to go to seminary and become a pastor. I could never have imagined that, not in the moment when I felt that I was supposed to be a teacher. I imagine that if they had known what they were in store for, Peter, Andrew, James, and John might have protested. I imagine that they would have said that they were not ready to participate in creating a new world. But Jesus called them to change their minds, to think differently about themselves. Jesus believed that they could help him create a new kingdom on earth, and so they did. So the question for us, of course, is what is Jesus calling us to today? How is Jesus calling MCC of the Palm Beaches to live into our vocation? What is our vocation? We defined it in our mission statement. MCC of the Palm Beaches is called to celebrate and share God's inclusive and transformative love through acts of worship, compassion, and social justice. That's our vocation. That's what Jesus is calling us to do. And what about individually? If you could hear Jesus calling you, what do you think he would ask you to do? Would it be the work you get paid to do? Would it be something that you volunteer for? Would it be something new? Because, my friends, here's a beautiful truth. If we discover and live into our vocation, whatever it is, we are no longer subject to the whims of the rest of the world. No one can pull you off course when you know that you are living into what Jesus has called you to do. So I invite you this week to ponder, where and how is Jesus calling you? How am I living into my vocation already? Maybe it's volunteering at the food pantry. Maybe it's teaching. Maybe your vocation is being an assistant to someone who needs you, or changing the letters on the sign, or running the soundboard, or creating the bulletin, or singing in church. Maybe your vocation has nothing to do with church. Maybe your vocation in this moment is showing up to school as your authentic self. Maybe your vocation is bagging groceries or cleaning windshields. Maybe it's taking care of yourself as a retired person. Vocation is whatever God is calling you to, paid, unpaid, recognized or not, churchy or otherwise. Each of us in every moment is being called in the same way that Peter, Andrew, James, and John were called away from their fishing nets. We are being called away from the familiar into something unknown. And we have to decide whether we can trust this prophet who's doing that calling. Some days it'll be easier than others to lay down our nets and get up and follow Jesus. Many days we will plead for a plan, an idea of how it will go if we say yes. And we'll never get that. Some days we won't have the strength to leave everything we know and follow some itinerant rabbi who asks us to love ourselves and each other as we love God. And that's okay too. Because what we know of God, who came to us in the form of a human being who was just like us, what we know of God because of that is that God is with us in all the most human aspects of our lives. In our doubt, in our fear, in our grief, in our joy, in our pain, in our laughter, and our promise. So my friends, claim your vocation. Claim what it is that God has called you to be and do in the world. And know that while it may seem frightening, however God calls you, God will support you in that call. Amen.